very grateful to be here, and Linda, thank you for the invitation. And I always like to start any step work. Kelly's waving at me. Oh, cell phones. Yeah, please turn your cell phones to vibrate or preferably off. A couple hours won't kill us. We put on a men's retreat this last summer, and we asked the guys to turn the phones off for the weekend. It really just changes the entire experience about being present. But I like to start any step work, especially a workshop, with a prayer. So if you'll indulge me with a long moment of silence, and then I'll say a quick prayer, and we'll see where God takes us. Loving God, please help me set aside everything I think I know about my disease, my recovery, and especially you. Please open my heart and my mind and my soul to a new experience with my disease, my recovery, and especially you. Amen. So, I don't know how I wound up here today. I'm going to try to share some of that, how I wound up here. I'm not going to talk too much about the other steps. I'm going to share with you some of my experience with the 4-step, obviously, and some of the other steps. I think it's important to at least briefly talk about them. So as I said, I'm an alcoholic. My home group is the 164 Pages group. We're in Frederick, Maryland. We're a strong 3-legacy group. If you're new or old in here and don't know what a 3-legacy group is, that means that we use the 3 sides of the triangle to guide our group: unity, service, and recovery. Unity is the traditions that guide our group and our group conscience, and service is not so much really what we do at each meeting, but it's what we do in between each meeting. You know, that's really what makes my home group special, is what we do in between each meeting. We have a number of commitments and institutions and treatment centers and jails and stuff like that. And recovery, obviously, is the 12 steps. I have a sponsor, thank goodness. I think sometimes I need my sponsor more today than when I got here. I'm certainly a lot more open to listening to one, that's for sure. I sponsor a bunch of incredible guys that do more for me than I've done for them. There's no question about that. And those, I see a woman nodding to that fact. She's obviously sponsoring a couple women. And that's what it's all about, is going through this process and getting free. It's been, this 4-step process was so transforming for me years into recovery that I can't get enough of it. My sobriety date, I have a sobriety date. It's July 5th, 1989. Just picked up my 26-year chip, thanks to you people. And don't let the gray beard fool you. I am not in my 60s. I am 43. I darkened the door of Alcoholics Anonymous at 17, and been sober ever since. I actually got introduced to AA at 16, and wasn't ready yet, but certainly already qualified to be here. I mean, I think if you guys had brought an AA meeting into my kindergarten class, I would have identified. I mean, I was born restless, irritable, and discontent. There was always something wrong with me. I had the spiritual malady from the beginning. I thank goodness somehow I just stayed alive long enough to find the treatment that I needed, and it worked for 6 or 7 years, and that was alcohol and drugs. If I had not found alcohol, I'm not at all in doubt I would have killed myself by now. That's how bad the restless, irritable, and discontent was. And there's no blame to that. It's just what it was. I grew up in an alcoholic home, and it's certainly not my old man's fault that I'm sitting here. My sisters and brothers aren't here. My sister should be, but it's not his fault by any means. I was born with this disease, and I'm very grateful that at a very young age was introduced to the answer, which is you guys in this process. I wish I could tell you I got sober at 17 and everything's just been beautiful every day since. That's not the case. My sobriety has been this incredible roller coaster. I mean, just up and down, up and down, up and down, especially for the first 15, 16, 17 years. I think a lot of it, I see it, I do a lot of stuff with young people in AA, and I think it's a lot more prevalent, especially with younger people, that, when I got here at 17, thanks to the judge, I had this really bad stretch of bad breaks and misunderstandings, and I had joined the Young Entrepreneur Club of marijuana sales, and I got arrested 3 times by the same cop with the same buddy on the same street in the same car in like a 3-week period of time. And by the time I made it to the judge, he said, listen, you can go to juvie jail or you can go to treatment. And it was a 6-month treatment center, treatment program. I zipped right through it in 13 months, and they saved my life. They really did. And they gave me a lot of good information, a lot of bad information. But what I'm telling you is that at 17, I was not convinced that what I needed was a spiritual awakening. I find that almost impossible to impress upon any young person in or out of recovery that that's really what you need. I think, sober or not, it takes a lot of failure, a lot of mistakes, and a lot of, excuse your expression, but I'll say it, butt whooping to get to that point. Because being a young person in recovery, it was alcohol and drugs were the problem. I mean, I know what the book says, that it's just a symptom, but like my case was a little bit different. I just needed, to not get arrested anymore. I needed to not be a slave anymore to this disease. And, I had this long list of if-onlys when I got sober. If let me just get my stuff together, let me get off of probation, I need to get a new girlfriend, get my place squared away, get a new car. I didn't have a driver's license when I got sober. If I just had those things, I would be okay, looking for the outside world to fix me. And again, I just don't think you can be convinced of that at too early of an age. But in treatment, they did some really good things for us, and they gave us some bad information as well. They tried to push us through a 4-step, but the 4-step they had us do was out of a pamphlet. I don't know if it was from Hazelden. When I speak, I always blame Hazelden for it, but it was, I don't know what it was, but it was nothing like what's in our book. It had a lot of questions about, my mother and my dog and all this stuff. It was a crazy pamphlet. But I did it, just checking it off and just going through the process because, I had to get out of there and I wanted to get off probation. But they bought me some sobriety time. What they really did for me was it enabled me to fall in love with the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was a Fellowship AAer for a long time. I love the Fellowship. I love the Fellowship today. The first time I got introduced to AA at 16, I love the Fellowship. But that's different than the program. A lot of people shaking their head. The program, Alcoholics Anonymous, is the 12 steps. And there's obviously a lot that encompasses it, but, it says, here are the steps we took, which are a program of recovery. I was got sober in an AA club, the Rockville Metro Club on South Lawn Lane. First meeting I ever went to was a 10:30 candlelight meeting. They had a disco ball hanging from the ceiling. It was the wildest meeting I'd ever been to. The best description I'd ever heard of it was that it was like the bar scene of Star Wars. There was every walk of life in that meeting, and bikers, bankers, hookers, lawyers, gangsters. It was just everybody, and everyone was loving on each other. And what was interesting in that meeting, and I don't want to get too much into my story here, but my entire life, everyone had wagged their finger at me or sat me in front of a chair and said, John, what in the hell is wrong with you? Why do you do those things? Why do you keep doing this? Why, and you guys know the answer. I'd stare at my shoes as long as I humanly possible. And if they made me speak, I said, I don't know. Right? Somebody just said it. And I didn't. And the fact that they were asking me what was wrong with me instantly discredited them, right? Because if you're so brilliant, tell me what's wrong with me. But when I came to AA, you guys were talking about me, but not talking to me. You didn't even know I was in the room, but you were talking about me, and you were talking about the way that I was suffering, and a lot of you were talking about it in a past tense, and I knew I was in the right place. So like I said, I zipped through that treatment center, and they told me things like meeting makers make it, which I've since done 26 years of research, and I've found that it's not the case. The 12th step does not say having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these meetings. It just doesn't. Don't get me wrong. Don't come up every time I say that, someone comes up to me and kind of puts their finger in my chest and says, I've been sober 400 years. I go to a meeting every day. I'm not talking about don't go to meetings. I go to 5, 6, 7 meetings a week if I can. But I don't. My soul, my spirit, this work does not happen by osmosis. Meetings are incredibly valuable, especially today. That's where I get to find the new guy to beat up on. 18, 19 years old, I'm out of treatment, and I've got this long list of things to fix, and it didn't work. I just got toxic in here, and I did my first I joined the Navy. I didn't know what to do with myself. I joined the Navy, got kicked out of the Navy. That's a whole other story in and of itself, and got sent home. Got hooked up with a bunch of old-timers that were starting an AA club. Rockville Metro was tired of the young people for good reason. We stayed up all night and played spades and broke into the candy machine and, drank all the coffee and didn't put a nickel in the basket. I mean, they didn't tell us we weren't welcome, but, so we started this AA club, and that was awesome. And I found a hostage who I called wife, and, it was just a toxic AA relationship, and didn't take long until she left. And when she left, I had 5 years sober, and I was just done. My life was it seemed like just as much a mess as when I got here at 5 years sober. Probably more of a mess. On paper, it was probably more of a mess. I don't know, but the pain level was almost greater because I wasn't medicating. I wasn't in a fog anymore. And I'd gotten this sponsor, Charles, God bless, who I love him to death, and this isn't picking on Charles, but he was very subtle. He was not a really firm guide through the steps. He just was quiet and soft and was always waiting on me. I'd call him up with the disaster of the day. My wife's leaving, my car's broken down, I don't have enough money, my job sucks, whatever it is. We all listen to those calls from our sponsees. And he'd say, John, my experience is when I work the fourth and fifth step out of the book, my life gets better. And I'd say, okay, but what about my car? What about my job? What about my wife? And then he'd say something like, well, listen, I just talked to Rick. He's really hurting. Why don't you pick him up and take him to a meeting? And I just thought, man, we are not speaking the same language. It was like I was Charlie Brown's teacher or he was Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 wah. I mean, nothing was being transmitted and received. At least I thought he was doing just fine. And so I did that. I went at it by myself. I said, let me go at this four-step because my life's a mess. And I'd been to in those 5 years, I'd been to probably a meeting every day, but maybe my 10-day naval career and another 5 days. I mean, I hadn't missed a meeting. And so, I'd heard about the resentment list, and there was another Metropolis Club down in D.C. had this big list of character defects, 44 character defects. So I said, all right, I'll make this list of resentments, and then I'm going to make this list of character defects, and I'll check out which ones I might have and maybe write some about them. And it was the best I had. My first four-step was not searching and fearless. It was shallow and cowardly. That was the best I had. And then went over to his house and we did a fifth step. And it was, even with, I don't want to say it was half measures, but even that poor attempt at a four-step was magical. I mean, that was really when the isolation of self started to leave. Like I said, Charles and I were exact opposites. I mean, God was really ringing my bell. We were exact opposites. I'm tall, he's short. He was old at the time. I mean, he was 50, and I was 22, So he was an old man, and he was African American. He was short. He was heavy. I was thin. He was well educated. I'd been thrown out of high school. He was very well off financially, and I couldn't rub. I mean, we were every aspect. We were complete differences. And when we did the fifth step together, I told him my story the best I could, and he told me his story. We were exactly the same, and it changed my life. Even with that poor four-step, if you will. And I don't think there's such a thing as a poor four-step. So let me get that out right now. As my sponsor says, we're not going to give out a trophy today for the best four-step award. There is not a way to do this perfectly. The exact opposite, though, is true that the only way to do this terribly is to not do it. So we have to give ourselves a permission to fail here, and things were great. After that, and a couple years later, started getting into 8 and 9. No need to rush into the rest of the steps. I've got some good results, and life got awesome for me. In the 12 and 12, it talks about boy meets girl on AA campus, and that's what happened to me. I fell in love with a beautiful woman, and we had an instant family. She had a young child, and really young child, and we built a life and a family together, and started having kids every 9 months and 5 minutes, and it was just fantastic. And some of the promises started coming true in my life, and a lot of the material consequences, benefits, promises, if you will. I don't like to call them promises, but a lot of good financial and material stuff started happening. And that became my new higher power in AA. I was drunk on material success in AA, as my friend Levi calls it, the cash and prizes of sobriety. And I mean, on all appearances, I was a great AA member. I mean, I'm at a meeting still almost every night, and you need a ride in my brand new car, hop on in, you need $20, I'll go pick you up. You want to go to do some service? I'm in, I'm not out of the fellowship by any means, but I'm getting off the true path of carrying the message for sure. And I don't want to tell you all of it, but the long story short is that 15, 16, 17 years, I became so spiritually sick that I didn't even know where the path was anymore. I mean, I was behaving worse at 17 years than I was with 17 months, It's just like a cornfield, you're in the path and you take a couple steps off before you don't know it, you don't know where the path is, and you just keep going the best direction you think, I have a sponsor kind of, I'm not really using them. I see it a lot with the guys that I've sponsored, in the past. I was using a sponsor not so much as a guy, but I was using a sponsor kind of as a parole officer. It was like, hey, I decided to do this, and this is what happened. What do you think? Lost half the benefit of a sponsor, of his wisdom of having already walked down this path. And that's really what, to me, a sponsor is today, is just, there's no brain surgery in sponsorship. It's monkey see, monkey do. Find some person that's a couple farther steps down the path and say, hey, how do you get down there? Find some knucklehead that's a couple steps behind you and say, let's go. And so after train wrecking my life at 17 years sober, just real briefly, the IRS garnished my checking account 3 times in that year. I was arrested in sobriety for not paying my speeding tickets. My house was in foreclosure. My cars were repossessed. This multi-million-dollar business I owned was repossessed by the stockholder. I fell off a ladder about 18 feet on the cement and broke my arm at 90 degrees. It was sticking like that. My pelvis was broken in 3 places. I violated my vows to my beautiful wife, and because of that injury, I was stuck in a lazy boy chair for, 2 or 3 months by myself, stuck in my own skin, just full of the highest level of self-pity I've ever experienced. And finally, at one night, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I just couldn't take it anymore. I was in the fetal position, crying my eyes out like a schoolgirl, thinking, do I blow my brains out with a shotgun or a rifle? And that's the best I can come up with at 17 years running my own life. What I didn't know was that manageability never returns, as alcoholics. That lays still in God's hands. The big book never promises that returns. And I really thought AA didn't work, and then I had a moment of clarity. I was like, hey, dummy, you're not doing AA, you're not doing anything close to AA, and through one of God's little bank shots, I got introduced to my now sponsor. She'd given me this 4-step talk, and I was driving to work every day, making a quarter of what I used to work, driving someone else's car, like the book says, similar to a concern of one I once owned, and I was listening to this 4-step talk, and it just absolutely blew my mind. I couldn't believe that that's what the 4-step was out of the big book. And it wasn't his 4-step, it was out of the book. I literally pulled my car over on the way to work, and like I thought he was talking about the 5th edition or something. I mean, that couldn't have been in my book, and it was. And after a couple of days, I don't go through all of it, but after a couple of days, I surrendered and said, all right, I got to call this knucklehead up. And he's 1,000 miles away, and I found his name in the white pages on Google. And I introduced myself. I made sure it was the right guy. And I say, hey, listen, I heard your 4th and 5th step talk, and I'm absolutely dying in sobriety. I'm not going to make my next anniversary. I can't take another second in my own skin. And I said, will you do the 4th and 5th step with me, as you talked about in your talk? And he said, no. I said, oh my God, here we go again with these communication problems with these sponsors. And he said, I'll do all the steps with you. He said, I got a half a notion that the reason why you're in the spot that you're in is because you've been working on a kind of cafeteria style, a la carte, take what you want and leave the rest program. I said, oh my God, is that true? And so he said, listen, if you're willing to do what's in that book, I'll help you. And I said, I will do whatever it takes. I mean, I'm all in. I'll drink the Kool-Aid. I'm in. And that's what we did. We opened up the very first page, and we just did the black part. We didn't do what was in between the black part. And no one in here will be surprised as a result of doing exactly what it says. When it said stop and pray, we stopped and prayed. When it said stop and make a list, we stopped and made a list. When it said stop and consider, we stopped and considered. And doing that, as a result of that, I had a spiritual awakening that was unlike anything else I'd ever experienced. And I've never taken a guy through the steps like that and that not happened. Yeah. Sometimes gradually, sometimes immediate, I'm really described well on page 57 of our text, where it says, some of us grow into this slowly, the very last paragraph. And that's been my case. And what I found through this whole process, and we're going to get into the instructions here in a little bit, but I want you to know why I love this subject so much. I have no desire to be a teacher or anything like that. We're going to do this work together today. But my experience has been that all of these steps are divinely designed by God to help remove from us what's blocking us. And that's not my idea. That's what the book says in a number of places. The top of 64, if you want to go there, at the end of the third step, it says, though our decision, which decision? This third step, top of page 64, though our decision was vital and crucial, okay, Bill, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. And at the beginning of Into Action, the next chapter, it says we've been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. This whole deal is removing what's blocking us from God. And so as we go through this work, it's going to sound very technical, very almost surgical, because I was so done with self at that point. I decided I was going to do exactly what he told me to do, exactly what this book says. I mean, to the T. And so that's what we're going to talk about. Like, it says we did this in black and white. I didn't use a blue pen, right? I'm going to use a black pen. Like, that's how crazy I was about removing self from the process. But I think it's dangerous to make this into a system or like excuse the word, like a religious type dogma. It's not. This is, the only bad fourth step is the one you don't do, for sure. So when I was going, and so that's the reference I'm going to use. I'm going to talk to you how my sponsor took me through the steps. I'm going to talk to you about how I take guys through the steps. And so after doing the third step, which the essence of the third step to me is, it used to be surrender, and today it's more about ownership, right? Like this, whether I'm 17 days sober or 17 years sober, this pile of wreckage that I have here in front of me, sometimes it's a big pile, sometimes it's a small pile, is mine. I am the one who created it, Wasn't Levi's fault, wasn't my wife's fault, wasn't the IRS's fault, What I have found is that victims do not stay sober. They just don't. And some of us are victims, but if that is what defines us, we're in big trouble. And that's what this process I found really does, is it enables our past to stop defining us. Because my past defined who I was for a long, long time. So he took me through the first couple steps. Into the third step, we said the third step prayer together over the phone, 1,000 miles away. I'm in a parking lot on my knees. He said he was on his knees. I don't know if I believe him, but we said the third step prayer together. And then he said, listen, the big book gives us two choices as to when we're going to do the fourth step. You can pick either one. And I thought, okay, now I get some choices finally. And here they are. Here are the choices. At the bottom of page 63, after taking this step, the very bottom, it says next. That's a time reference. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first of which is a personal house cleaning. And the second time reference that we just read before, it says, unless at once. So he said, these are your two choices. We can do this next or we can do this at once. And I thought, well, okay, that's not much of a choice. But really what I love about that previous sentence, which has just jumped out at me recently, is launched. It doesn't say we tipped our toes in to test the water. We're just going to do that. And so I'm going to ask you, like our prayer this morning, just set aside. I know there's some brilliant AAs in here. I don't mean that funny. I mean, there's people in here that are sober longer than I am, probably work better programs than I, know the book better, all that stuff. Let's just set aside for the next couple hours what we think we know. Because if I think I know that there is to learn about something, I'm not going to learn anything. That's just the way it is. I've got a 16-year-old boy, and he knows everything. And not only does he know everything, he knows how to tell me that I don't know anything. And that's okay. And I can just love him through that. It's funny, I do a lot of these four-step workshops, and I guess he was sitting at one, or for part of one. The guys I sponsor, we have this fun tradition. We do ours in green notebooks. I was told green's the color of growth or spring, or I don't know. We just superstitious. Fun, right? We do it in green. And I was cleaning up my son's room, and he had a green notebook. I said, what's this? I went over and looked at it, and on the cover it says, a list of people I want to punch in the face. He had his own little 4-step, so AA cures the whole family. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to go through this together. We're going to find an instruction. We're going to stop. We're going to take 5 or 10 minutes. We're going to follow the instruction. We're going to come back and do it. So you're going to leave today not with a finished 4-step, at least I don't think, unless this is a refresher for you, which I do. I try to do this once a year. There's people that believe if you do the 10-step perfectly, you never have to come back and do 4 again. That eliminates me right off the bat because I can't do anything perfectly, right? I mean, I do an 11-step inventory at night with my guys, and there's no way that that's perfect, okay? So to start, to get prepped, do this with your notebook. Open your spiral-bound notebook, cut the pages in half, and make 4 columns. If you notice, column 1's a little bit thinner than 2, and that's just because that's going to be just names only. Put a big 1, 2, 3, and 4 up there. And I know that Bill's example, there's 3 columns. We're going to talk about that. Don't shut me out. 1, 2, 3, 4. My new friend Richard here in the front is using a yellow pad. Big trouble. The book says black and white. I'm kidding. Black pen. All right. We got it half. All right, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's follow some instructions here. Top of 64. Therefore, we started on a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. And I think that's kind of the instruction to do a 4-step regularly. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. Sounds like a good plan. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, is what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. We can all agree on that. Self is the problem. So we're about to enter the resentment part of the inventory. As I read it in the book, there's really 3 main parts of the inventory. The resentment inventory, which takes the most amount of time, usually, in the workshop process anyways, the fear inventory, and the sex inventory. So we're going to get started here on the resentment part. Resentment is the number 1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. Not some, all. For we have not only been mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physical. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. So that's a general instruction. How do we do that? Well, here it comes. Here comes the first instruction. I ask you to underline it or highlight it, whatever you want to do. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. Stop. That's column 1. So at the top of column 1, write people, institutions, or principles, not on the lines, but just up there near 1 so you know what goes in column 1. People, institutions, or principles. Now before we start doing that, we're going to number down the page. We're going to write number 1, skip a line, 2, skip a line, 3, skip a line, 4, skip a line. We're going to need some room later. So number down your page if you want. It's the best way to do it. Skip a line. And once you've done that, we're going to take 10 minutes, maybe 15 if everyone's still writing, but definitely 10 minutes. We're going to list people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. A little bit later it says, we went back through our lives, and I found that's really the most efficient way to do it. Start with today and go back. List your family, your mom, your dad, brothers, sisters. Take that family tree and go out. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, second cousins. Do the family tree. Do the relationship tree. My current wife, my last girlfriend, all the way back. My current boss, my last boss, go all the way back through the bosses. My current professor. Well, I'm not in school, but you get the idea. Kind of go through it with the system, and then institutions and principles usually. And if you have any questions, please. I'm not going to talk at you for 4 hours. I promise. We need to do this together. Throw up your hands, belt out the questions. If you have the question, someone else is thinking about it in here. Institutions and principles. Institutions, the IRS, the university of whatever. And principles is kind of like, it's usually a religion is what Bill's talking about. If I have a resentment about my religion, put that down. So let's take 10 minutes and do that. do this in terms of kind of scheduling. By no means do I try to attempt to run a sponsee's life or anything, but what I do ask for them is to commit to me an hour a week to do their step work. If they can't commit an hour a week to their step work, most likely I can't help them. Right? Instead of your 14 meetings a week, cut one off, do 13 meetings and an hour of step work. And I asked them to make me 2 half-hour sessions, something like that. And I asked them to text me sometime during the week, schedule these sessions with yourself. And I'm going to share with you my experience. When my sponsor asked me to do that, boy, did I buckle. I'm a grown man. What do you mean I got to tell you my schedule? And, I just was really resistant. But what he said, because this process will take a little bit of time as we go through it. I don't think the 4-step takes 6 months. If you take 6 months, you're doing it wrong. But it does take some time, and my experience is that whenever I set out to do something, because I set out to do a lot of 4 steps in sobriety, people say, I'm working on it. We've all heard that, right? I'm working on it. And when I'm, quote unquote, working on it and not really doing anything, every time it gets brought up again, I beat myself up. I do that with my weight loss, right? I'm going to lose 40 pounds. My wife's heard me say I'm going to lose 40 pounds more times than she can shake a stick at. And so every time I, make my way to the refrigerator at 11 o'clock at night and get my Ben & Jerry's, I got to beat myself up again, right? Damn, I was supposed to be losing weight. And so next time I'm in a 4-step meeting and, that's the topic and I am, quote unquote, working on it and haven't done squat, I don't feel good about it. And so every time I make schedule these appointments with myself, not my sponsor, and I keep them, I feel good about it. It sounds so childish. I'm just asking you to try it, right? We're going to set aside everything we think we know, and I ask a guy to, text me, Wednesday at 10 o'clock, Friday at 11 o'clock, make it a priority in your life. Our priorities are not what we say they are. Our priorities are what we do. And a couple also things about sponsorship. I found that the 5 big characteristics of a good sponsor are he's taking the steps out of the same book. He's got a sponsor, right? I think I always have to have a sponsor. If I get to the point in my recovery where I don't need any more guiding, I don't need any more leadership in my life, then I'm in big trouble. He's deep into service. He's enjoying life. And for me, a sober member of the same sex is important. I'm not saying that it can't work, men sponsoring women. I'm not saying it can't work, but men and women are completely different, I don't know that if I could sponsor Barbie effectively. I just don't, I'd like to hear her 5th step, but I don't think I can, I don't think I can help her. And I think sometimes that changes if people are gay, that changes. I sponsored a lesbian for 10 years with my wife's blessing, with my sponsor's blessing. It worked perfect. It may or may not work. But men and women just sponsor differently. My wife, thank God we're still together. She's 23 years sober. She sponsors a ton of women. I sponsor a ton of guys. We're in the car a lot together. And our conversations with the sponsees are completely different. She'll talk to one sponsee for 45 minutes, and I don't think anything has happened. And my conversation, and a lot great has happened, of course, and I'm talking to a sponsee, he calls, and it's something like this. Did you pray this morning? No? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Did you go to a meeting yet? No? All right. Did you do any reading today? Oh, good. You read something today? Okay, good. Did you help somebody else out? No? Okay, good. All right, well, how's your step work? Okay, good. I'll talk to you later. See ya. Click. That's, men are much more brief, I read this study, and it's a true fact. Women use 19,000 words a day. Men use 7,000, right? So if I have a female sponsee, and she wants to talk to me at 11 o'clock at night, I've used up my 7,000 words. She's got 12,000 left. Someone's in big trouble, or vice versa, right? And that's obviously a magnified example, but men and women are different. If both great, but men and women are different. So, not to get off on this tangent about sponsorship, but I would not try this process by yourself. That's what I want to get at. So we got our first column. Let's find the next instruction. Conveniently, it's right after that. Number 2, we asked ourselves why we were angry. So number 2, at the top of column 2 is why, or the cause, same thing. If we take a quick second and look at Bill's example, it's the same thing as Bill's doing. Column 1 is who, column 2 is the cause, or we asked ourselves why we were angry. Now, if we look at this example real quick, don't start writing yet, stay with me. He's resentful at Mr. Brown. We all know him. I have a shirt that says Mr. Brown needs his butt kicked. It's not what it says, but you know what it says. And this is why. His attention to my wife, told my wife of my mistress, and he's going to get my job at the office. Count those words. I'll do it for you. There's 19 words there. Okay? So we're going to limit our why we're angry to 19 words. The point, like our friend was talking about earlier, reliving this, we don't want to relive this. We want to boil it down really to what we were really angry about. This column, this description of why we were angry should not start with, it was a dark, rainy Wednesday. And then she, fill in the blank. No. All right, let's get down to it. Why are we really pissed? That's what matters. Why? Not what happened. We're not concerned with the what anymore. Let's get into the why. Let's research this. So confine this to 19 words or less. Let's not stir this pot. That works. We're going to do column 3 in a second, and then we're going to take a break for you smokers and vapors. We asked ourselves why we were angry. I'm sorry. Yeah, let's review them. Number 1, we listed people, institutions, and principles with whom we were angry. Number 2 is we asked ourselves why we were angry. In most cases, it is found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burned up. And here comes instruction number 3, just like Bill's got here. On our grudge list, because this is what we've got, a list of our grudges, we said opposite each name our injuries. And this is multiple choice, which I know us men love. Was it our self-esteem? So we're going to all 5 of these. Write these on top of column 3 here. 5 choices. And Bill also gives them in the 3rd column example there. Sex relations, self-esteem, security, personal relationships, or pride. If you look on Bill's column 3 example on the right, there's 5 choices, and that's what they are. And he says that here. On our grudge list, we said opposite each name our injuries. Was it self-esteem, security, ambitions, which he calls pride on the column, sex relations, which would have been interfered with. We were usually as definite as this example. So for each person, write which of those parts of you was affected. And usually it's more than one. I know that's usually the first question. Sometimes all 5, sometimes 1, 2, 3, or 4. So let's take a couple minutes to do that, and then we will break. Everybody want to grab their seats? We'll get going until lunch. The question from Eric was, where would jealousy fit into that? I mean, I think that's kind of covered by the 5, but more specifically. If you want to, when I start to change this process, gets dangerous. All right, so let's get started. Levi reminded me of something really good. We talked about setting aside 2 30-minute sessions a week to do this. It's really difficult to sit down in one session and go through your entire life and cover all your resentments. It's good to have this, the first session usually, 30 minutes, because you'll start blowing through names, and then a couple days later you'll be driving down the road and they'll pop up, and that's what this process is about. It's about digging out the poison, and the more we the deeper we dig, the more that we'll find. And even as we get into the fear inventory and the resentment inventory, and weeks and months and years later, this process, I hate to call it a system, this system for relieving of us of our resentments works for the rest of our sobriety. It has to work. That's why I try to do a 4-step annually, is because resentments crop up over the time. So I'll grab my 4-step and add them back to it. Some of the people that I respect and love the most in AA do their 4-step out of the 12 and 12. And the big difference I see in those two, and I don't want to get in a debate session, but the difference I see is what we're about to find here, is that the relief we have found a relief prescription for these resentments. So let's go back to the book, the bottom of 65. At the bottom of the chart, it says, we went back through our lives. That's the system we use. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. When we were finished, we considered this carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. Can I get an amen? To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have it our own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. This is just kind of a side note. Bill has this habit of telling us kind of what we're going to do, and then he tells us how to do it, and then he tells us why we did it. And here comes the why of what we did with the resentment. I mean, we're using 3 or 4 pages of our 164 pages, which is a lot, just to talk about resentments. And here on this page, 7 times Bill talks about how these resentments are going to kill us. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, see, we're the ones in charge of this. We're permitting these resentments. We're not victims of them. Do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile? But the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, that's all of ours hope, right? The business of resentment is infinitely grave. That's 1, because if we're in the grave, we're dead. We found that it is fatal. That's 2. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns if we drink again, and we drink again. And with us to drink is to die. That's 3. If we were to live, well, if we're not living, we're dead. That's 4. We had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for the alcoholic, these things are poison. That's the 5th reference to death. If you poison me, you kill me. We turn back to the list for it held the key to the future. That's 6. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, so some of these resentments didn't even really happen, they had the power to actually kill. That's 7. How could we escape? We saw these resentments must be mastered. I know there's no must in AA, but there's one of them. There's no must for membership. There's no must for coming to meetings. But if we're going to stay sober, there are things we must do, and that's one of them. But how? We cannot wish them away any more than alcohol, which is kind of indicative of why my 4-step really didn't help that much. I made this list of people I resented and kind of why it was, but I didn't get the relief. I mean, what has happened in Alcoholics Anonymous and Bill Wilson in God's hands is actually just miraculous, right? We have found a way to not reinvent, I don't know what the right word is, but we have found a way to re-experience a spiritual awakening, right? We have found a system to get closer to God is what we're talking about. And one of the fun words that's worth looking up in the dictionary is brainstorm, right? The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. Well, we know what a grouch is, and brainstorm seems like it's an odd place. The typical definition of brainstorm is me and Levi and Linda and Bill get in a room and we're going to think real hard and come up with some good ideas. Eric, give the group brainstorm.
Brainstorm is a temporary abnormal condition of the brain, presumably causing insanity while existing.
A lot different. Does everybody hear that? That's right. The 1935 dictionary I have says brainstorm is a violent mental outburst. A lot different than today's. That's just fun. All right, so this is really where the 4-step in the big book distinguishes itself from the 4-step in the 12 and 12 and all the wonderful Hazelden guides and all that other stuff out there. Happens in this next paragraph. And this is what I missed for 17 years. And when that lady came up to me after 40 years of AA, sober for sure and happy, and this is what she had missed, is right here in this next paragraph. This was our course. All right, so this is giving us another directional what we're going to do. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. All right, we can all agree on that. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way they disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. I actually had to stop my car when I read that. T-O-O. So that means I'm also spiritually sick, right? Like, all along I've been spiritually sick. So my sponsor told me this. He said, you've got two choices, John. You can either ask God for justice for everybody or mercy for everybody. But you got to pick which side you want, and that's your team. And I've shared with you briefly part of my story, and I don't want any part of justice. So when I've got a resentment, I'm really enforcing my own justice. But all the time I'm asking God for mercy for me. That is a childish notion that I can expect the world to forgive me, God to forgive me, but yet I want justice for other people. It's childish, right? We have to get rid of that ideal. So that was our choice. And what I've found is that if we don't find a way to transform this pain that we've got, which is what these resentments are, we just transmit them. We have to transform our pain or transmit it. So it's the only choices. I recently learned, I've been listening to a lot of tapes, and this guy talks about the difference between, he stopped using the word change. He uses the word transform, and I really like that. Change is just to do something different, right? We decide we're going to stop drinking, so we're going to do yoga. That's change. But transform is to metamorphosize, to have something fall off of us. I like the word transform a whole lot better. And here's the instruction. So get out your highlighter or your pen. We ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done. Now, our basic text does not say more will be revealed. I thought it did for 17 years, but it does say that God will disclose more to us. And I think one of the things that he disclosed to us is on page 551. So go to that page with me. We're going to read some more about resentments. Joanne closed up her book like she was done her fourth step. We're just getting started. All right, here we go. In the middle of page 551, here's a story about a woman that's got a 25-year-old resentment. In the middle of the page, it says, this resentment was against my mother, and it was 25 years old. I had fed it, fanned it, and nurtured it as one might a delicate child, and it had become as much a part of me as my breathing. It had provided me with excuses for my lack of education, my marital failures, personal failures, inadequacy, and of course, my alcoholism. And though I really thought I had been willing to part with it, now I knew I was reluctant to let it go. One morning, I realized I had to get rid of it. For my reprieve, if you look up in that book what reprieve means, it's a stay of execution, not just relief. So it's going to kill, again, another threat to our life. This resentment she has is going to kill her. And if I didn't get rid of it, I was going to get drunk, and I didn't want to get drunk anymore. In my prayers that morning, I asked God to point out to me some way to be free of this resentment. During the day, a friend of mine brought me some magazines to take to a hospital group I was interested in. I looked through them. A banner across one featured an article by a prominent clergyman in which I caught the word resentment. He said, in effect, if you have a resentment you want to be free of, if you'll pray for that person or thing that you want to resent, or that you resent, you will be free. If you ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. Ask for their health, their prosperity, and their happiness, and you will be free. Even when you don't really want it for them, and your prayers are only words, and you don't mean them. Go ahead and do it anyways. Do it every day for 2 weeks, and you'll find you have come to mean it. So we're going to use that experience as well. There's 2 places where the book tells us to pray for that person. And so we're going to do that. And so what my sponsor had me do was go down my list. On the very first person, my mom, I would do exactly what the book says. Going back to the instructions on 67. Let's look at them again so we know what we're doing. Top of 67, it says, we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that I would grant a sick friend. And so I'm going to deal with these one at a time. This is not a group prayer, as much as it would be nice to. So I say, God, please help me show my mom the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. And then on 551, it says we ask for God to give them the same peace, health, and prosperity that we want for ourselves. And to personalize it, God, please help my mom have great grandkids. Please help her be relieved of her financial insecurity. Please help her, whatever, fill in the blanks. Pray for the other person. Personalize it. I love that part it says there about even if you don't mean it. right? A lot of these prayers start with, oh, dear God, I don't mean any of this, but my stupid sponsor told me to do this, so here I am. Right? Right? What I've found is that, our job here in AA is about 0.5% of the work. God does 99.5% of the work. But if I don't bring that 0.5%, I'm done. I've never seen God transform anybody without their willingness. Right? I've never seen somebody go to bed an asshole and wake up a saint. Right? It just doesn't happen. It only happens from, can you edit that out, Bill? I didn't say that. It only happens from surrender and willingness, right? The surrender happens. The byproduct of that surrender is willingness, willing to do whatever it takes. And that's what it looked like for me. When I was doing this, like I told you, a multi-million-dollar business deal gone bad. Absolutely 100% my fault. At the time, I didn't feel that. So I was on my knees. Dear God, I don't mean this. So let's take 5-10 minutes, pray a couple of these to ourselves. Oh, and so what I was going to say is that as we go down our list, we're going to say this prayer for the number one person on the list. If we mean it, if we really feel like we mean that for them, I want my mom to have these good things. I want her to be free of her fear and great grandkids and, a beautiful home and all this stuff. If I mean it, I'm going to put a check mark against it, next to it. If I don't mean it, just going to keep going. That's fine. Just leave it alone. And we're going to go down the list. And over a period of a couple times doing this, our list will be whittled down to 2 or 3 or 4 people that we have resentments against, and those are the ones that are eating our lunch. But our job is, like it says, to be thorough and honest. So we're going to go down the list just to be sure. This is not a confession. This is an inventory, right? It says we're going to find some good things, some bad things. We might find we don't have this resentment anymore. So if we mean it, check mark. So we're going to take 5 minutes. Silently, we're going to say these prayers, just like the book says. It's top of 67 and 552. Say this prayer, or both those prayers for each person. Take 5 or 10 minutes, and we'll pick back up. Idea how that works. And again, Joe, that was a great question about do we still do this if they're dead? And that's where this was really so transformative for me, was with my father. My entire childhood and early 20s was absolutely, I hated everything about my father. As a kid, I would lay in bed and fantasize about his death, literally. And I got sober and went to treatment and all that stuff, and I just thought, I bought what they fed me, and what they fed me was true. He did the best he could with what he had, but the anger and the fear and the pain was so deep that that was the best I could do with it. But when I dealt with it in this process, it really changed completely my memory of my father, and it changed the type of father that I am, and it changed how I interacted with every man. It really, really did. I mean, at 17 years sober, I hate to tell you this, I had 0 intimate relationships with another man, including my sponsor. I mean, they were all like this, I loved hanging out. I had a couple guys that were, every Sunday we watched football together, we played golf together, we traveled together. I had my, what do they call them, road dogs. But in terms of intimacy, there was 0 of it. And having gone through this process, I mean, it's just embarrassing to tell you that. I now today value the intimate relationship with the men in my life today just unfathomably, and being able to pass that on to my son and tell another man that I love him and mean it, and it's just so. And that if I had cut it short by saying, "Oh well, he's dead," I'd have missed the whole boat. Another thing I wanted to talk about that process is we don't know the effect it's going to have down the road. If you go with me to page 14, the very bottom, very, very, very last sentence. Bill says, "For if an alcoholic fails to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life," which is what we're talking about, we're enlarging our spiritual life here, "through work," that's what this is, work, "and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead." I've never talked about this from the podium, but so my wife, she was married first before we met and had a child, and her husband was unfaithful to her many, 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 many times. And then, we're married 17 years, and I violate our vows differently. I had what the therapists like to call an emotional affair. All the time I'm thinking, well, I'm not having sex with this woman. It's, not as bad. I mean, I know it's bad, but it's not as bad. Well, of course, I come to find out that with a lot of women, that's even worse. She had said, geez, I wish you'd just slept with her one night and been done with it. So, there I go thinking again. But I'm telling you all that to tell you that if my wife had not done the work, this 4-step work, on her first husband, when this had happened in our marriage, I would have been him all over again. And our marriage would have been done. I'm here to tell you 9 years later, was happier and more in love and more intimate than we've ever been. Only as a result of that work. Only. And so if she hadn't done that work, like Bill says, certain trials and low spots ahead. So, we can't just leave something uncovered, because of it. And as a result, if you go to 124 with me, which is on and off my favorite sentence in the book, which is another reason why we do all this work, the middle paragraph, the painful past may be of infinite value to other families still struggling with their problems. We think each family which has been relieved owes something, and that's what we're doing here, we're getting relief, owes something to those who do not. And when the occasion requires, each member of it should be only too willing to bring former mistakes, no matter how grievous, out of their hiding places. Showing others who suffer how we were given help is the very thing which makes life seem so worthwhile to us now. And here's the money sentence. Cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession you have, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. That's why we got to be completely thorough. So we've prayed down our list. Back to the instructions on 67. This is where we get into the 4th column. A lot of people say there's no 4th column in Bill's example. You can't do it that way. Okay, I agree. But open your mind here and listen to what these instructions, and it just seems like that's the most convenient place to put them. And again, so we've prayed down our list, and we've gotten to the point where we mean it for all of them. We don't go forward with this part until we mean it for these resentments. And this is why. It says, referring to our list again, everybody with me? Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done us. 67. The paragraph starts with referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done us. Well, how do we put these things out of our mind? We got to pray them away. We do not have the power to forgive. Right? Whatever resentment anyone in here is carrying, if you had the power to forgive it, it'd be done. Right? It's not fun. God does that. We resolutely look for our own mistakes. I can't look for my own mistake if I'm still holding the resentment. They are not mutually inclusive. They can't happen at the same time. I can't be screaming at Levi for being late, picking me up all the darn time, and then also tell him, and then also at the same time account for my mistake, which was, not communicating on what time it was to be picked up. That's a silly example, but you get the idea. They don't happen together. All right? So that's our guidepost. We don't go forward until we can put these out of our mind. And that can take a long time. I've never, and on that part in 552 where it says we do this for 2 weeks, I've never seen somebody do that earnestly for somebody for 2 weeks and it not work. I've heard of that. Someone told me that happened. I believe them. But when this list gets boiled down to a couple people, the ones who are eating our lunch, 1 or 2 people, 3 people, I have a sponsee. I say, okay, we're going to do this prayer part for them every day. Morning, take a lunch break, middle of the day, and at night. 3 times a day, we're going to say this prayer for them. I've never seen it not work in 14 days. All right, so here is the next instruction. Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we look for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? That's column 4. Write that at the top of column 4. Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened. Another easy multiple choice. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 or 4 of them. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or frightened? That's the top of column 4. Some people say write this out separately. That's fine. Write it out separately. That doesn't make sense to me at all. We've got this list. It says referring to the list, so put it next to the damn list. But sure. Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. I invite you to turn to 67 and underline those so that when you're sponsoring somebody, take them through them. And that's a great point. You know, I always, when I'm taking a guy, I always like to go to the book together and find it. Let's find the instructions together. You know, I don't need you to be, you know, willing to listen to an instruction. Let's find the instructions together so you can show the next guy. That's really the purpose of our book, is to maintain the integrity of our message. So let's take 5 minutes or so, a little more than 5 minutes, and fill it out for column 4. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Again, if we can't disregard them, then we're still probably feeling the resentment. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, not our part. That's the most and I hate to nitpick the thing, but we hear so many people in 4-step meetings say, oh, in the 4-step I found out what my part was. That's not what the book says. We're going to find out what our fault was. We listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. No blue pens. No pencils. We admitted our wrongs, honestly, and we're willing to set these matters straight. So like 3 or 4 times here in this paragraph, our faults, our mistakes, not our part. So in the relationship, and even if you still are feeling the resentment, quote unquote, as Joe asked, still try to do this part. You know, you might, and then after you've done the prayers, your perspective will change. But that's the idea. This first 3 columns is really getting it down. What is this really about? And then we pray down the resentments, to what the book says. And then after having done that, we have this new perspective. So now that we've got this new perspective, where were we at fault? What was our mistake? And then usually one of the questions at every workshop is, well, I don't think I was at fault. You know, I hate to use this example. You know, my uncle abused me. It wasn't my fault. Of course, right? The only reasonable answer I've ever heard to that makes any sense, that might be worth putting on paper, is a woman said, well, I found that my fault was I held on to it for 50 years, right? Joanne gives me an exactly. You know, that does not mean that we deserved it. We're not going there at all. You know, nobody should be abused for any reasons. We're not saying that. But if we're going to look for our mistake, is that we didn't get help for it soon enough, whatever the resentment is. We held on to it too long. We didn't talk about it. We didn't share it. I was too afraid to share it with somebody else. That was our mistake. We didn't get relief soon enough. Because after you leave here today, you're going to have the answer. You know, you have the answer. The answer to the relief for the resentments, right? So let's take the next 7 minutes doing this 4th column if we can. If we can't because we're resentful, then don't. And then we'll pause for lunch. Okay, just to recap, we're obviously going to have lunch here in a second. That is the end of the resentment inventory in the big book. So just briefly to review, I think I spoke real quick a lot today, and we covered a lot in an hour and 45 minutes. I talk real fast, and that's Levi's fault for the espresso. So column 1 was, I am working on that resentment. I prayed for you the whole break. I'm resentful at, that's the first column. The second column is the cause of this. What happened? You know. The third column is what did it affect in me? We had 5 choices for that. And in that second column, we limited it to 19 words. And that's that first chunk of the inventory. And then we got rid of this resentment, obviously with God's help. It can't happen without God's help. And we prayed down the list as the book instructed. And then after having done that, we came back and reviewed it, as it said, referring to our list again, and found out where we were at fault with each circumstances. And that is where the freedom comes. And that's the end of the resentment inventory. So we're going to take a 30-minute break, have lunch, have a smoke, have a vape, and I'll see you here again at 12:30. Yes, Linda? We're still here. The smokers will just have to miss it. Thank you, everybody, for a great lunch, and thank you to those who came back. We only lost, I think, 2. And that's okay. It scared the hell out of me, too. But when you have 0 choices, it's all right. I usually, each one of these workshops is entirely different, and I think that's a good thing. I usually, though, in the course of the beginning of a workshop, like to take the group's inventory, and not in the sense that you all are giggling about, although that's fun too, but just to see, who's with us today. So how many people here have never done the 4-step out of the book before? Oh, that's awesome. That's fantastic. How many people have just done it primarily out of the 12-step and out of the 12 and 12 and want to try it a different way? Even better. Cool. I really commend you to showing up on a beautiful Saturday, August morning. I mean, you got to be a sick alcoholic to show up to a 4-step workshop today. I'm, of course, joking, but I love AA, and I have such a passion for this stuff because it had such a, as I described to you, incredible effect in my life and the men that I sponsor's life and my family's life. And real quickly, I also I want to give you my phone number and my email. If you want to talk about this later, if you don't want to put your hand up because you're nervous, and I'm also told that they're going to be recording this, so if you want a copy, I guess, give me an email and I'll send it to you after we burn them. My phone number is 240-246-3481. And my email is John, JOHN, at HOPINC.com, hopinc.com. And I love talking about the 4-step, and Bill and I were talking during the break, and I know Linda's sponsorship lineage does that last part of the 4th column, separates that into a couple more columns, into 5 columns. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, right? Like, who cares? 4 columns, 5 columns, 27 columns. We're just doing the work that's in the book is what's important. I don't. The email is John at hopinc.com, but Inc is spelled with a C, not with a K. Eric asked me a great question during the break about how do you change sponsors that his had a sponsor. Hope you don't mind me sharing this. He's had a sponsor for a couple of years, and they haven't really talked about going through the steps yet. So congratulations on realizing I need to switch sponsors. And he said, how do I do that, and where do I do that? And so, we talked about the characteristics of a good sponsor. And where I find these guys, and I'm talking from the male perspective, but changes for women, is in a men's big book meeting, or in a big book meeting, a men's step study, something like that, is where you find those guys. And, because usually what the treatment centers, and there's also a great guide on sponsorship back there that Linda is trying to shove down our throats. I'm just kidding. It's I think 487 pages of reading on what a sponsor is and isn't. No, it's a great little pamphlet, but to boil it down, like we talked about, someone that's been through the steps, they're in service, they have a sponsor themselves, they're enjoying life. We won't stay here if we don't find a way to enjoy our sobriety. That's a fact. And so it doesn't mean we don't have tough times, pain. That's inevitable, right? We read about that and talked about it. But so, you go up to a guy that you think, if a guy's talking big book when he speaks, or a gal, and is talking spiritual awakening, and is talking about sponsorship, and is talking about being of service in jails, institutions, and stuff like that, chances are that's your guy. Because what the treatment center world tells us is find somebody you can relate to. Well, when I first got to recovery, that's a terrible idea. Who can I relate to? Right? The liars, the thieves, and the cheats. Oh, well, he's a plumber, I'm a plumber. Fantastic. That's not somebody you can relate to. Oh, he did Oxycontin, I love Oxycontin. That's a great... No. We have to find somebody that we're willing to follow. And that's important to me even today, right? I mean, one of the big myths is AA has no leaders. That's not true. Look at the traditions. We have leaders in AA, but they're trusted servants for sure. I need somebody to lead me down this spiritual path. And what's funny, because when I was out there ripping and running, I had no problem, right? I had no problem somebody showing me how to buy, sell, and cut drugs. This is an AA thing, but, same deal. When you have your blow and go in your car and someone shows you a way around that, right? I had no problem following people out there, but somehow when I get sober, I'm done following. I'm in charge now. I got it. That's a recipe for disaster. So don't find somebody you can relate to. Find somebody that is qualified. And then go up to your current sponsor and say, hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you sponsoring me the last couple, whatever. Decided I heard this guy, he really rung my bell. I want to go through the steps with him. And if your sponsor gets upset, that confirms your decision. Because sponsorship is not about ego, how many sponsees I can accumulate. Zero of that. I had a guy fire me last week, and I honestly, from the bottom of my heart, was so glad that he found somebody else that he was willing to follow. Because he certainly wasn't listening to anything I said, right? I mean that. Who cares? Find the guy that's going to help you, Sometimes schedules just don't meet, It's as simple as that. So, and just go up to them and thank them. And if they get angry, you made the right decision. And if they get into the whys of it, I don't want to talk about the whys of it. Just say, this guy really lit my bell up, and I want to go through it again. But I hope we can be friends. And that has always worked out in my life. I've never seen that go bad. So that was my public service announcement on sponsorship. But it was a great question, and I'm glad to see there's so many people here that haven't done the 4-step inventory. So we finished the resentment inventory, so let's go back to the book. We're going to get into the fear inventory. This is usually the quickest of the inventories. Not the least important by any means. When I went back through the steps at how many ever years that was, 17, 18, 19 years, this was really where I got so much relief and found how much fear was running my life. But let's read it, and then we'll find the instructions, and we're going to do them. Just the black part. Bottom of 67, last paragraph. Notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. Did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. So here again is a general description. Okay, we're going to review all of our fears thoroughly. How are we going to do this? We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. So Bill's kind of separating this part of the inventory. So we're going to make a list. Flip the page over a couple times. Make room for more resentments because they're coming later. Flip a couple pages down and make your fear list. I am afraid of dogs. I am afraid of cats. I'm afraid of heights. Fill in the blank. And you'll find that the farther you go, the more kind of in depth they'll go. And then we'll talk about some of these. But let's take 10 minutes and list all of our fears. Don't just write down the word heights, dogs, spiders. I don't know why. It seems to have a little more meaning if we slow down and kind of make a sentence out of it. I'm afraid I'm not good enough, all those types of things, instead of just making a quick list. So let's take 10 minutes real quick.